I am ending the fixed camera debate right here in this video, and the many myths that surround the usage of fixed cameras in horror games. They have always been a stylistic choice from the very beginning and not out of hardware limitation. And I am not going to be using anything but objective fact from the creator of the Resident Evil series, Shinji Mikami, in his interview with the famous French magazine Le Monde, in which he goes into explicit detail about the creation of the first Resident Evil game, stating that the reason they were originally going to go for first person was because of hardware limitations, not fixed cameras, keep in mind. A lot of people make the argument that fixed cameras were used because of hardware limitations, but that's not even remotely true. They were originally going to make it first person, and the PS1 obviously was able to handle first person games because games like Doom and Duke Nukem were ported onto them. They were 100% going to make it a first-person game because they thought that the PlayStation 1 was going to be 50% less powerful than advertised, until Shinji Mikami played a little game called Alone in the Dark, which is the biggest influence on the Resident Evil games. I mean, it is literally a continuation of the formula Alone in the Dark made, because he said that fixed cameras allowed for greater expressiveness, because, I mean, if you look at these fixed cameras, for the most part, these are literally like paintings almost, and they are really, really beautiful to look at.
What do you think, Jay? I'm not a big art guy. You don't like art?
And he literally said without Alone in the Dark, Resident Evil would have been a first-person shooter. And this was always obviously his vision for the series going forward, as if you remember, 2002 rolls around, the Resident Evil 1 remake comes out, and he retains the fixed cameras despite the fact that Resident Evil 4 was being developed at the same time with this new quote-unquote advanced camera system. But he didn't use the camera system from Resident Evil 4 because he knew the fixed cameras were essential to what made the original Resident Evil games so phenomenal. From the very beginning, from the creator's own words, have always been a stylistic choice. And no one can ever disagree with that ever again, because that is the truth. The hardware limitations thing is a myth. Like, look, I'm not an elitist snob or anything like that. I love all the new Resident Evil games as well. Resident Evil 4 Original is a top 5 Resident Evil game for me. If anything, it's my top 3 favorite game in the series. I've played all the remakes, I platinumed the remakes, but you guys gotta have some respect for the older games, because these were stylistic choices that really paid off, to be honest, because honestly, like, there really was nothing more intense than back in the day. And even now when I replay these games, when you're creeping around a house and you come into a room and you have to rely on your hearing, you can't just rely on your vision, you have to rely on your hearing to see like, oh, where is the zombie in the room, because I can't see right now. If it even is a zombie, it could be a new enemy they're throwing at you, maybe the footsteps sound faster, maybe there's a guttural that the zombies don't have that give you that audio indication that, oh, wait, I don't know what's in front of me, I don't know what's coming up now. Because I feel like an important thing for what makes horror games work is also not knowing what you can see. Sometimes the scariest things are what you really can't see in a horror game. I mean, that's the reason the first Jaws movie worked so good. You can't even see the shark for most of the movie, yet it's still really intense because you don't really know. And it's more relying on your own fear and what your mind can come up with of what could be in the next room or what could be ahead of you. And I feel like that's a very underutilized part of a lot of newer horror games, personally. And then they would rather let your mind go to the worst places on its own without them even needing to do anything. And then on top of that too, I mentioned before, like, even from an artistic perspective, like, moving through these environments makes you feel like you are moving through paintings. Like, if you struggle with moving in a fixed camera environment, try to think of it as that you are looking at a painting. Like, even outside of gameplay, even outside of the inspirations for the series, like, fixed cameras, what makes them so appealing to a lot of people, myself included, is the usage of perspective. I'm a big art guy, I draw a lot in my free time, and point perspective drawing is one of my favorite things to do, and I think it's why I love fixed cameras so much. And I think it also plays a large factor in why a lot of fixed camera indie games tend to fail, because Shinji Mikami and the other developers at Capcom, I think, understood how basic perspective kind of worked, and that's why the Resident Evil fixed cameras feel very good, but why a lot of games you'll see that use fixed cameras on Steam, a lot of indie games specifically, don't exactly have that correct feel to them. And there are like a lot of really phenomenal ones as well. But others can be a bit on the clunkier side, and if anything, it's kind of funny because like how I feel about these games is how people probably feel about the actual like well-made fixed camera games. A lot of the angles in these fan games, while I do appreciate the effort, they do kind of miss the mark, I think, because they don't have a very good understanding of perspective. And I think if they did kind of study it a little bit more, they might really succeed. Because honestly, I think it's a really excellent way to showcase a visual beauty of an area. And I think when the camera is static and staying still, it's the same way a painting acts when you're looking at it in a museum. Since it's static, you're able to really look at all the details in the environment. Versus if the camera is constantly moving all the time, and, you know, obviously it's harder to look at a specific detail, or maybe even framing it, honestly, like a movie almost. Like each camera angle is framed specifically to showcase a specific angle, to make something look taller, to make something look more menacing, like the lab in Resident Evil 2, for example. You have this downward kind of shot of the plant monster growing in the stairwell area. Like, fixed cameras are just really good for emphasizing things like that in games. Honestly, like, in comparison, the remake almost feels like it's compensating for the fact it doesn't have these angles to show you the size of the lab. Like, the scale in the remake is honestly kind of a bit ridiculous looking.
That must be Lord Farquaad's castle.
Uh-huh, that's the place.
Do you think maybe he's compensating for something?
No, look, I do know that going back to these games, if you've never played them at all before, can be very intimidating, and it kind of breaks my heart because I do relate to you guys. Like, I get that these controls can be a little intimidating and it scares you off from playing, and it does kind of make me feel bad because you guys are genuinely missing out on amazing games. Because you have to remember also one thing too. Bad games don't get remade. These games clearly were legendary enough and groundbreaking enough to have gotten remakes, so just go back and give the older games a try. Because trust me, like, it's really not as hard as they might seem on the surface. Like, let me just break it down really simple. The movement is not tied to the camera, it is tied to the character. Whichever direction your character is facing, like, forward is always forward, back is always back, left is always left, right is always right, no matter what the camera angle is. So just focus on the actual character model, not the environments, because I feel like that's what trips people up most of the time when playing the older games. And the reason I make this video isn't even to be inflammatory, it's genuinely educational, just to make people appreciate these older games more and the style of game they were trying to go for. Because that's, I think, another big misconception of going back to play the older games after you've played the newer ones, is that you're expecting it to play like a shooter, and that's never really what the original games were supposed to be. Like, you have to go into these games with the mentality of like, okay, I am playing a 90s puzzle game. Like, you're playing Alone in the Dark, you're playing Myst, you're playing Grim Fandango, you know what I mean? Like, you are playing games that are more akin to those than your traditional shooter that we have now. Because remember, I mean, the PS1 had shooters. You had games like Tomb Raider on there that were these over-the-shoulder shooters where action was more emphasized. Resident Evil was never that. And it's okay that it's evolved into other things now, because like I said, I enjoy the newer games, but a big part of going back to enjoying the older games, you do have to get into that mentality of like, okay, I'm gonna be like solving puzzles and stuff. I'm not really gonna be like, you know, this action hero kind of thing. But I'm also not like in like a bunch of chase sequences, like, and constantly on the thrill of my seat like the Outlast games or something like that. And just on one final note, obviously, like, you know, I obviously referenced This Is the End before, the James Franco movie, and, you know, he has that classic line in it where he uses video games as an example of art. And, you know, there's been a bigger push, I feel like, in the gaming space in recent years to kind of consider video games art. And I feel like if we are going to look at them truly from that lens, then we have to also look at the kind of technologies that have developed with art over the years. I mean, like, you can argue with the advancements of things like Procreate, there's no real need to traditionally paint things anymore. But people do still traditionally paint a lot of stuff because it produces a specific result that invokes a specific emotion. Fixed cameras, in my opinion, and I would like to argue, do a very similar thing. For horror games, for that kind of puzzle, mysterious kind of vibe, not being able to see everything is crucial to the environment and tone of these games. So, in my personal opinion, I do think we should use them a little bit more. But I don't want to misconstrue. Like I've said before, multiple times in this video, I like the over-the-shoulder games. I played the hell out of the rail shooters on the Wii. You know, I love all the spin-offs. To be honest with you, I am a hard advocate for making a Resident Evil karting game if they made it, because I love the characters in the universe so much. I would just like to see a little diversity come back to the gameplay aspect of Resident Evil, because I feel like it's kind of stagnated for a bit. Like, I grew up in the early 2000s playing Resident Evil when, you know, we were still getting fixed camera games, we were also getting over-the-shoulder games, we were getting rail shooters, you know, it was just so exciting to be a fan of Resident Evil at the time, and I feel like the series has just kind of stagnated a bit, which kind of bums me out, despite that the newer games are still very good. I just wish we had a little bit more, to say the least. So if you did make it this far and you haven't been foaming at the mouth, thank you very much for watching and hearing me out. And if you like stuff like this, please make sure to follow for more.